In that moment, she allowed herself to fall apart, watching him enter a ballroom full of people she had never met before. The collapse was not the product of a new wave of loss and sorrow. It was the outcome of something much more complex and overwhelming. In every fiber of her body, she knew him. But the young man standing there beneath the hot lights was an almost unrecognizable figure. He was calm. He was confident. Terri Irwin has had to deal with some of the hardest things a person can face. The sudden and very public loss of a husband. The lonely challenge of raising 2 children under the scrutiny of the world. And the huge weight of living up to a magnificent legacy. But when she saw what her son Robert had become, silently and painstakingly, a dam of long emotion burst wide within her. She was teary. It was a transformation that no one, perhaps not even Terri herself, had fully anticipated. And it showed a depth of character that had been created in the shadow of an icon. Robert Irwin has become an eternal image to the world. An eternal image of a little kid with a big smile, clad in khaki, joyfully following behind his bigger-than-life father, Steve Irwin. This image has been such for a long time. He was the jolly sidekick, the obvious heir in miniature, wrestling with a creature that probably had teeth. It was a moment in time captured in a photograph by the sun, and it became a permanent part of the Irwin family tradition. As a comforting remembrance of a beloved hero, the people were willing to let it go on like that for a long time to come. Yet as the world mourned Steve and celebrated the birth of his daughter, Bindi, Robert was quietly changing within. This change was primarily out of the rigorous inspection, almost in plain sight, but it was missed by many people. Stephen and Terri Irwin's only child, son Robert Clarence Irwin, was born on December 1st, 2003, in the state of Queensland, Australia. They had 2 children, and he was their second child and only son. Before the memories that would last a lifetime were made, his life was dramatically impacted. His father, known all around the globe as the crocodile hunter, was mortally penetrated by a stingray barb at Bat Reef in September of 2006. He was just a few months old then. By the time a child is 2, a father is not a collection of memories, but a smell, a sound, and a sense of comfort. Robert's knowledge of Steve Irwin is a patchwork of archive material and the impassioned stories his mother tells, and the slight, often sorrowful change in people's reactions when they attach his face to his father's name. It is a particular and profound pain to mourn a presence you knew only briefly, a ghost you are told you resemble. Over the years, the public conversation rarely examined the psychological ramifications that this single event was having on Robert beneath his outward optimistic appearance. The cameras got his infectious smile, but also his sincere passion to care for animals. What they didn't see, at least in those formative years, was a small child quietly carrying a heavy load while growing up in the shadow of a legend he could never personally turn to for advice. Terri has spoken about those horrible years in carefully picked portions in a number of interviews on several times, and has always been fiercely protective of her children's privacy. It was a moment when she had to learn to run a world-famous zoo on the fly, shepherd 2 grieving children through the light of public life, and somehow keep going for a world that looked to her for strength. The time following Steve's death was like being in a cloud, she said, all-consuming and bewildering. Still, she also made it pretty clear that Robert was more than just a passenger on this difficult voyage from the get-go. He had a characteristic that both terrified and amazed her even as a tiny child. He had this quality. He didn't just watch animals. He connected with them in a way that was alarmingly like Steve. It was a relationship that was without fear, without hesitation, and not on learned bravery, but on what appeared to be a fundamental, natural ease. He started appearing on television with his mother and sister only when he was 4 years old. The audience quickly became aware of what Terri had been seeing in secret for a number of years. It was not a child playing to the camera. It was something natural, something deeper than imitation or teaching. And time made this nature only more clear and undeniable and ever more. There is a phenomenon that no one can fully prepare you for when you are raising the kid of someone who died young and in public. This phenomena is when the child starts to become them. This change is not metaphorical, but rather a jarring, bodily and spiritual one that could prevent you from catching your breath. Terri has described these times with a naked vulnerability. Moments when Robert would say something in a certain intonation, tilt his head in a familiar way, or his face would light up when describing an animal. And for a fleeting second, the past and present would collapse into one another. These moments have been described by Terri. In those days, the father and son were difficult to discern. She has said, often with tears in her eyes, that she can sense that Steve is really in the room. For Terri, it's a bittersweet combination of anguish and ecstasy, two sentiments that have grown inseparable because they are so tightly intertwined. These events are a mixed bag. The blessing of seeing her husband again in the form of her kid is inextricably bound to the sorrow of his absence. On the other hand, the parallels went far beyond than attitude and mannerisms. As Robert reached his teens, the physical resemblance between Robert and his father became blatantly clear. This was something fans and followers of the Irwin family that had been following them for a long time knew. This was not your ordinary family resemblance. It was an almost perfect echo of the original. He grew up with the same athletic build, exuded the same inexhaustible joy in front of a camera, and exhibited the same utter lack of fear of animals that would make most seasoned experts pause for a moment. For those who grew up watching Steve's initial videos, meeting Robert was like witnessing a ghost from the past, a reincarnation of a younger crocodile hunter. It was a sense that was widespread for people who grew up watching Steve's movies. Rather didn't feel like a performance or a conscious effort to copy, but rather felt perfectly natural, like an echo that was etched into his very DNA. This is a significant insight. Terri's feelings were highly mixed as she observed the slow transition that was taking place. Around 2024, Robert started talking about his father with a strong emotionality that often took interviewers by surprise. He grew up knowing that his father was a father figure to a whole generation, not just to his own children. He told me how difficult that was for him in particular. He said he felt very lucky to have the legacy he did, but he said it in such a way that it was very clear that this was a conclusion he had come to strugglingly, and not one he had just accepted. He no longer bothered to hide the fact that he felt a very real feeling of loss beneath the surface of his appreciation. It was another one of those times for Terri when great pride and great anguish came as inseparable companions. It was an incredibly emotional experience for her to hear her child articulate these complex concepts in such a public forum, with such knowledge and perspective at such a young age. For the first time, the world was beginning to see the depth she had always known. The resemblance was a cute one in the past. Today, it was believed to be something that was substantially more nuanced and important. Robert was not becoming Steve. He was becoming his own person. But Terri could feel the echoes of his father everywhere, and he recognized they were everywhere. Robert Irwin's tale might be read in any number of ways, one being that he became famous for having lived. He could just manage to do enough to keep the family name in the public awareness, and the world would have accepted it, even celebrated it, for he was the son of the most beloved wildlife celebrity in the history of the modern times. But Robert took the harder way, the way most people in his position would rather not take. He created something entirely his own, while at the same time scrupulously paying homage to all that came before him. By his early teens, he had already established himself as a household name on late-night television in the United States. He was a frequent guest on The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon. He would show up on the set with an ever-changing cast of exotic animals, and he would handle them with a calm and a knowledge that always amazed both the crowd and the host himself. This was not a matter of him playing the role of a character or using the name of a well-renowned family. He was just Robert. Not only was he sincerely eager, but he was astonishingly knowledgeable and had a natural, unforced charisma. He didn't have a pre-written conservation message or talking point. It was something he lived and breathed, and I think that's why people connected with him so strongly. Then came the age of the camera. Robert cultivated a personal passion and built a serious and widely recognized body of work. His animal images, noted for their intimacy and technical skill, soon began appearing in exhibitions throughout the world. In 2020, he won first prize in a major wildlife photography competition for a terrible shot he took of a forest destroyed by a firestorm in Australia. This was a big confirmation of his work. The shot was not only technically excellent, but it also had an emotional impact. This is the kind of photo that gives a viewer the sense of loss before they even understand what is going on in front of them. Terri knew in a flash what it meant the moment she saw the image. Robert wasn't just capturing images of the natural environment. He was slowly but surely building a compelling case through his artwork, showing the public exactly what was at stake and why it mattered. Then, in a move that looked to be totally out of the blue, he joined the cast of Dancing with the Stars for the 34th season of the show. So over the next few years, the show had one of the most unexpectedly dramatic and engrossing plots it had ever had. Every week, Robert didn't just dance. He reached out and touched the audience and judges on a personal level. He brought a unique narrative approach to the dance floor, infusing each performance with a sincerity that carried a dramatic impact. He danced in front of millions of people for the very first time when he was 21 years old. He managed the tricky knack of being wholly himself and completely unpredictable. What was happening was that Robert Irwin was at last and firmly moving out of the frame the world had built for him ever since he was a boy, although few people could identify it so clearly at the time. On stage, he was more than Steve's kid playing a part. When he stepped on stage, he was Robert Irwin. After you'd been shown the difference, you couldn't unsee it. Think about the huge pressure that his upbringing placed upon him. As Robert was growing up, he had a name that carried a weight most others could never understand. He had been compared with someone, somewhere, ever since he was a little boy. Compared, that is, with every camera aimed in his direction, and there was no way of escaping. Every animal he reared, every interview he gave, was seen through the lens of his father's legacy. The average person under this kind of relentless strain either withdraws from the spotlight or becomes a caricature of themselves. Robert, very amazingly, did neither. Instead of becoming less specific, he grew more specific. More of him, not more of an homage. This resulted in a number of small but significant manifestations. His support for conservation was not only a continuation of Steve's work, but based on the most up-to-date facts, a sense of urgency and the extinction of species that he could film with his own camera in real time. He was not telling them to love animals because his father had, but he was showing them what was now being lost, and asking them what answers they meant to make to this. This move from tenderness to action was a hallmark of his own personality. Terri had silently wished for this specificity, this insistence on being wholly himself while respecting his father at every turn, and perhaps, in her most private moments, she had been afraid that it might never fully come to fruition the way she thought it would. Somehow, after an eternity, it happened on a national platform, millions watching, and she could see it as clearly as they could. And the relief of it was enough to tear her apart. On the evening of October 14th, 2025, Terri's carefully constructed veneer finally crumbled before the world. Participants in the episode named Dedication Night on Dancing with the Stars performed in tribute to a person who has made a major difference in their careers and lives. Robert's mom was the reason he decided to do it. The pre-recorded video package featured Robert trying to explain what Terri meant to him before the dance had even begun. This was not reality TV forced sentiment. He was clearly straining to retain his cool during the whole thing. He talked about his father dying when he was just 2 years old, and about how, as he got older, he had started to understand the enormity of what his mother had gone through following his father's death. At the same time, she was personally shattered. She had to administer a zoo, bring up 2 children in the relentless glare of the public eye, and uphold a worldwide legacy. "I'm so grateful to you," he said. "It's hard to put into words. It's so big." He said Terri was there all the big events, though he would have liked his father to be there. And that was enough, he added, managing to get through the statement with only a few words left. Terri was in tears in the ballroom before a single note of music had been played. The routine itself was a modern piece, a physical embodiment of that relationship. It was a testimonial to what it takes a woman to carry so much, and what it means to a boy who has seen his mother bear it all his life. As soon as the last note faded, Robert walked directly off the floor into Terri's arms. His sister Bindi, who was sitting nearby, rushed over to join them. In the midst of the ballroom, the three held on to each other, and the audience, which had gone silent for a moment, suddenly erupted in a heartfelt applause during the performance. The judges were clearly uncomfortable.
"Steve's probably watching with a smile on his face," said one person. Another, who had worked with Bindi on the program a decade earlier, was so emotional he couldn't finish his feedback. The atmosphere in the room had transformed entirely from that of a competition to something far more intimate and significant. Later, Terri described the encounter as though she were describing her observations rather than her feelings. A defensive move against feelings too big to express. It felt like seeing Steve again, and yet at the same time, it was unmistakably Robert, she said. She's always been very cautious to maintain the two realities going together as far back as she can remember. On social media, she said it was a night she'll never forget, and praised her son as not only a gorgeous dancer, but a great person. The general population responded immediately and massively, but this was not the only occurrence of the sort. On November 11th, a date selected to commemorate Steve, Robert, and Bindi danced a foxtrot. The foxtrot was to the song Bindi had used to remember their father during her winning season. Footage of Robert and Steve's youth was projected over the floor of the ballroom while they danced. As Robert reached the end of the dance, tears began rolling down his face. Judges gave it a full 10. Robert thought over the performance in the following days and said it was not a burden carrying his father's heritage, but a direction. He said he felt his father's presence, too, in everything he did. Terri saw all this. In every single performance, interview, every moment of vulnerability. For over 20 years, she had been the rock of strength for everyone around her. And for a minute, she was completely unable to keep it all together. And every time, she responded the same way. Watching her son dance on a TV show, she saw something more. This was the final result of everything she had been working so hard on behind the scenes for over 20 years. There's a certain kind of loneliness that comes with being the surviving parent of a famous, admired person. Your first job is to carry the children, and thus you must carry your own pain in solitude. The children can't see you fall apart completely. Terri had been walking that impossible tightrope for years, with a calmness the world often mistook for strength. But need would have been a more appropriate term. There was no room for her to relax and drop her guard. It was likely the first time in a very long time that Terri didn't have to be the one to hold everything together. This was because she had been able to watch Robert perform on that platform week after week, achieving something so absolutely extraordinary with the immense weight that had been handed to him. Another individual was doing the holding. It was the release she had been waiting for, all unconsciously, and it was reality after all. By the time the 34th season finale aired on November 25, 2025, the public conversation surrounding Robert Irwin had undergone a dramatic change. It was no longer the son of the crocodile hunter dominating a reality show. Over the course of the season, he had become the story. In the days coming up to the conclusion of the program, a revelation was made that Robert had been dancing through a major injury. The stakes were already high, but this finding raised them higher. He had been suffering for weeks from a dreadful strain of the intercostal muscles, the muscles between the ribs. His professional partner said it in an interview about how the production crew had gently changed the choreography to accommodate, and how Robert had just decided to fight through the anguish without making it a public narrative. When asked about the injury, Robert admitted it, but he framed it the way he did most problems, not as a sacrifice, but as a choice he made since the alternative was unthinkable. This unimportant fact, however, spoke volumes about his personality. In particular, about the fact that he was raised by a mother who showed him by example what it means to take in more than you should have to, and to go on, not for the sake of an audience, but because the task required it. On the night of the last show, Robert and his buddy did 3 shows that were just beautiful. Their penultimate freestyle routine wowed the judges to the point of a standing ovation before the scores were revealed. One of the judges called it a near-perfect dance. When the winner was revealed, Robert Irwin was crowned the champion of Season 34. He joined his sister Bindi in the show's winner's circle, 10 years to the day after Bindi won the competition herself. Terri appreciated the poignant symmetry of the occasion, but she was not the only person in the room to do so. In an interview after winning, Robert talked about his mother with an emotional honesty that clearly affected the person conducting the chat. He outlined the things Terri had achieved since Steve's death, including keeping Australia Zoo a success, raising 2 children under the scrutiny of the microscope, and championing a worldwide conservation cause, as well as dealing with her own personal grief. He said he got emotional when he thought of the real expense it had been for her. He called her extraordinary, saying that she was a lady neglected by the world from the first. Perhaps the most telling thing about the guy Robert Irwin had become was that he knew that he had been watching and understanding it all those years. No, it was not the medals, nor the awards for photography, nor the notoriety of being on television. The cause was the realization. It is with the utmost gratitude, the sharp realization of his mother's sacrifice. As she heard him say those things, Terri got the awareness that she had accomplished something that she had maybe not allowed herself to completely grasp until that moment. She had done it. Not only had she maintained a past, she had guaranteed that a family remained together. What her parenting got her was a young man who could see the world clearly, feel the emotions deeply, and carry the weight of his past forward without being crushed by it. And there was the reason for her weeping. More than everything else that had happened in those frenzied weeks, they were tears of pride and tears of pain for the man who was not present to see it. But most of all, they were tears of pure, soul-deep relief. Robert has characterized the film as being very emotional to watch. Steve Irwin once said that his ultimate ambition was to one day be able to step back and enable the next generation to take the mission forward. Robert described this as being highly emotional. "Then I'll know I've done my job," he said. He never got to experience that for himself. He was only 44 years old at the time of his death, and all the burden fell squarely on Terri's shoulders. It was a quest that required managing a zoo, raising 2 children, and the eyes of the world to see what would happen next. A man standing in a ballroom, 21 years old, holding a prize. He was talking about his mother with a type of clear-eyed, earned thanks that takes a lifetime to learn. Here's what happened next.
A young man who had transformed his sadness into a purpose, his pressure into an identity, and a name that could have been a prison into something that looked to his mother and to the rest of the world a lot like wings.